Λοιπόν, δεν θα πω ψέματα, ανυπομονούσα γι' αυτό. Κυρίες και κύριοι, αγαπητοί φίλοι, εκ μέρους της Στέγης Γραμμάτων και Τεχνών του Ιδρύματος Ωνάση, σας καλωσορίζω σε μια πολύ ξεχωριστή βραδιά. Απόψε έχουμε τη χαρά και την ιδιαίτερη τιμή να φιλοξενούμε έναν από τους κορυφαίους σύγχρονους συγγραφείς, όχι μόνο στις Ηνωμένες Πολιτείες, αλλά σε ολόκληρο τον κόσμο, τον Πολ Όστερ. Η πρόσκληση αυτή της Στέγης Γραμμάτων και Τεχνών προς τον Πολ Όστερ και η επίσκεψή του εδώ συμπίπτει με το ξεκίνημα μιας νέας εκδοτικής πορείας για το μεγάλο αυτό συγγραφέα στη χώρα μας, καθώς πριν από περίπου 1,5 χρόνο οι εκδόσεις Μετέχμιο αγόρασαν τα δικαιώματα του έργου και
publications, because the Metechmion publishers have recently acquired the rights, and we have seen new very beautiful editions of his translations. I have received today the last book that Metechmio published, and I think that there is no need for further comments. On the way to this event, I received messages, phone calls, and I was following the expectation expressed on the web in view of Paul Auster's presence here, arrival here. So, I will continue by saying that this discussion will take place in English. There is simultaneous interpretation, automatic interpretation, says the speaker. And at the end of the discussion, you will be able to ask the author questions, but please, questions, not comments. Our time is valuable, and we don't want to tire our guest or the other members of the audience. I don't want to spoil the evening for you, but I will be strict. That's it.
So, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. On behalf of the Onassis Cultural Center, I welcome you to this very special night. It is an honor, a privilege, and a great pleasure to have with us tonight one of the greatest living authors, not just in the US, but worldwide, Mr. Paul Auster. I had the pleasure of meeting Paul in August 2013 when I visited him in his neighborhood and his beautiful house in a place as strange as Brooklyn, as William Styron has put it. One of the many things that struck me when I first met him was his voice. As he himself has put it, and I quote, "It must have something to do with all the cigars I've smoked over the years. That rasping rumble in the throat, the clogged up bronchia, the diminished lung power. I've heard the results on tape. I sound like a piece of sandpaper scraping over a dry roof shingle." Paul quit smoking. He told me yesterday when we met, he quit smoking cigars. But really, seriously now, Paul lives in a lovely neighborhood, and I feel that he's very happy there indeed. I also felt that this brooding philosophical artist, as he has been characterized by American commentators, he's not so brooding after all. He has given many interviews. He would prefer to stay away from publicity, I know that. But alas, he has to cope with the publishing world, and alas, with us journalists. But here's a funny story. Yesterday, Paul's agent, Mr. John Mukakos, and his wife took us out for dinner, and we had some time together. And Paul told me that a few years back, I think it was on the occasion of the promotion of Lulu on the Bridge, he was in Japan, and he gave 35 interviews in just 2 days, talking to the Japanese. Now, that's a fairly good way to do harakiri, perform harakiri, isn't it? But then he collapsed. You collapsed, didn't you?
I wound up in the hospital.
So, Paul, welcome you again. I think you do feel how warmly you're welcomed here in Athens, Greece.
It's been a remarkable 2 days, I have to say. I've had a wonderful time, too. So, no more cigars, but I've switched to e-cigarettes. So, it's my new life.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. That's healthy.
Very healthy.
It's very American too, isn't it? Being healthy.
Well, Americans like to think so, but I'm not sure they're such healthy people in the end.
All
anyway.
right. Now, when we met yesterday, I thought that Paul would want to discuss issues and topics of tonight's event, but no. He surprised me by asking me to surprise him. Right? Okay, then I will try to surprise him a little. So let's start with the first video of tonight's event. Take it away.
Oh, video.
Just you know why you and I will by and by know true love ways. Sometimes we'll sigh, sometimes we'll cry, and we'll know why. Just you and I know true love ways. Throughout the days, our true love ways will bring us joys to share with those.
That was Buddy Holly. You know, I wanted to show you this because you had his photo on that book, a report from the interior, which is going to be published in Greek. And it's a kind of a sequel or a twin book to the Winter Journal, autobiographical fragments. But this, especially that book, has a second section with photos that were very important events and people who were very important for you. Now, I guess you were listening to Buddy Holly when you were something like 12 or 13 years old?
Even younger.
Younger.
He was one of the first rock and rollers that I liked. You seemed yesterday to have all the dates in mind. That Buddy Holly was killed in a plane crash.
Yes.
In early January 1959. So I wasn't even 12 years old then. And he was only 24 when he was killed.
And he was in the same airplane with Richie Valens.
Richie Valens and the Big Bopper. And
Big Bopper.
So it was a dark day for the little people of America who were so crazy about their music.
But this incident was pure luck, bad luck, of course. But somehow I think that it's in an indirect way connected with your work, because luck and coincidence plays some role. And you told me that 2 years after this event in 1961, you had an experience that, I don't know if it changed your life, but it stayed with you, the thunder incident. Would you like to share it with us?
I can talk about it. It was, so by then I was 14. It was the summer of 1961, and I was sent off to a summer camp in the country, and on a hike with about 20 boys. We got stuck in a thunder and lightning storm, and one of the boys who was right next to me was killed by lightning. We were crawling under a barbed wire fence to get to a clearing, and just as he was under it, the lightning struck the barbed wire and electrocuted him. I think it's probably the most important thing that happened to me as a child, a young person. Suddenly, the ground became very unstable. I wasn't sure after that whether the earth was going to just give way under my feet wherever I was. And I think that terrible experience taught me that anything can happen at any moment. And I think it's informed my thinking about the world, not just the writing I've done, but how I view my own life and the lives of other people. And the instability of reality, it's very hard to take hold of that and embrace it, because we want things to make sense. And often they simply don't make any sense at all.
You told me back in when I met you in Brooklyn that you felt that I could have been that boy.
Well, if it had been 5 seconds, 10 seconds later, I would have been under the barbed wire. But the funny thing was, I didn't think about it at the time. I was just worried about him. He was dead, but we didn't know he was dead. And so I and the person behind me, and maybe one of the people in front, we dragged him into the field, and we tried to revive him, not understanding that he was dead. I had never seen a dead person up to
That was the first time.
The first time, yeah.
But you reflected on this incident years later, perhaps, as you were getting older, and
Yes.
you felt yesterday. I think you told me that was your own battlefield. That was your own experience of combat.
Well, I've been very lucky. I've been one of those blessed people in the world who has not lived through a war. I have not been in combat, nor have I lived in an occupied city. I have not seen relatives being taken out and shot. Something that millions upon millions of human beings have had to live through. Nor have I lived through an epidemic or a plague, in which people were dying right and left. So I've had what one would call an ordinary life, and how blessed one is to have an ordinary life. But that day was my little version of war. We were under attack. It was the lightning, and the lightning is a lethal weapon.
And like an artillery. Or
it was. It felt like that, and it was one of the biggest storms I've ever been in. And so it killed my comrade, and I've never forgotten it.
So we have a picture, a view of America in the 1950s as something nostalgic and idyllic, and Buddy Holly somehow symbolizes that. But let's see something else for just 1 minute, the next video, which is not so nostalgic about America 1950s.
Just to talk about Buddy, I liked all the fast songs. I never heard this one.
You really?
No, I liked Peggy Sue and
Sue.
Wake Up, Little Susie and all. No, that was the Everly Brothers, but Buddy Holly's
it's a
fast
nice ballad,
songs.
isn't it?
It's very pretty.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. Let's see the next video, please.
My recollection was that in this now famous 2¼ page document, there were about 35 names listed. This is pretty serious. Have we had anything as serious as this so far?
Oh, yes, I think we've got something much more serious right now.
Well, I'm talking about up to the prior to this hearing.
May answer that question, Mr. Chairman. I think we've got a much more serious situation now in communist infiltration of the CIA. Disturbs me beyond words.
Well, we haven't. The members of the committee have not been advised, and I do think that...
Oh, yes, they have. Oh, yes, they have.
Have we, the names and of the people...
I've discussed this matter with the members of the committee. I've also discussed with the members of the committee the question of communist infiltration of atomic hydrogen bomb plants. I thought that was, I think, even more important than this infiltration of...
just let me finish and do this one point.
Now,
may I have from the files all of them?
This is an actual footage from a session of the Committee of Un-American Activities back in the early 1950s, and this guy over here who was talking about infiltration of communists in the CIA was Senator Joseph McCarthy from Wisconsin.
That's right.
And you have a picture of, I think, of him, or at least of that Red Scare.
Well, that's what we call it in America now, the Red Scare, and it happened in a big way right after World War II, and it was one of the fundamental factors shaping American reality throughout my childhood, the fear of communism. It started before McCarthy. I mean, as early as 1947, they were investigating the movie industry, and the famous case of the Hollywood 10. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
Yeah, the people who were blacklisted.
Yes,
and they
people
couldn't
blacklisted
appear.
and others who refused to testify were sent to prison. Quite a number went to prison. McCarthy emerged in around 51, 52, and just as things were quieting down, and he took the country by storm, and until he himself was brought down and finally died not so long after. By 1957, I think he was dead.
An alcoholic.
Yes, he was a crazy alcoholic who terrified the country, and very few people were willing to stand up to him.
If I recall correctly, when we were talking in Brooklyn back in 2013, I think that you made comparisons between that era in America with the George Bush era after 9/11. I don't know if this comparison stands, but this craziness and this scare that was spread.
Well, after 9/11, the Bush administration pushed through something called the Patriot Act, which is a kind of Big Brother law in the United States, so that the government has the right to listen in on everyone's phone conversations, even find out what books you're taking out of the library. A real interference with personal life, which is undoubtedly unconstitutional in the United States. But again, people aren't challenging this vigorously. There have been all these, now since then, these enormous explosions of information that have come. The WikiLeaks case, and now,
the Snowden case.
And the Snowden case now, and so this kind of interference of civil liberties goes on in the United States. Whenever we get scared of an outside force, we seem in some funny way to turn on ourselves.
But Bush is gone, and all these kind of scandals like the Snowden case and WikiLeaks came out during the Obama administration.
Yeah.
And you told me that you felt very, very alarmed about how the government handles personal information, private information, and all that. And that was during an administration of a Democratic president, and especially Barack Obama.
Yeah, I think what happens is, a man is elected president. He hasn't had the job before, and then the people in the intelligence agencies tell him what's going on, and he gets really scared.
He gets
really scared because things are a lot worse than he ever understood. And so rather than stopping all this, Obama has let it continue. The same thing happened with Lyndon Johnson in the Vietnam War, which was his undoing, which really harmed America to such a degree that I don't think we've recovered from it, the Vietnam War. And Johnson was a strange politician, very capable in some ways, quite crazy in other ways, but he listened to the generals when he shouldn't have been listening to the generals.
So that's how the Vietnam War escalated during his own presidency.
That's right. I mean, there was a moment when we had, and this was my days as a student, 500,000 troops in Vietnam at one point. That was the peak. It was a terrible mistake.
So you think that people like Obama cannot actually proceed with their own policies because a whole system is blocking them? Because outside of America, we have the sense that Obama is weak and that he hasn't really done what he was supposed to do from the early beginning. And I mean, one big question is, why hasn't he closed down Guantanamo?
Because he couldn't get anybody in the country to accept any of the prisoners, and the Republicans kept voting back all the solutions that he proposed. Well, as I said to you yesterday, the thing about Obama is this. I think he's a very capable person. He has decent ideas. He has proposals for changing things in America, fixing problems that desperately need to be fixed. But the problem is this. Not only have the Republicans always tried to squash the Democrats whenever they've been in power. In the last 30, 40 years, we've only had 3 Democratic presidents. We've had Jimmy Carter, who was one term, and
Bill Clinton.
Most of you won't remember Jimmy Carter's administration, but he was being punched all the time by the right. Then there was Clinton, who had a very rocky ride. Clinton was the most conservative Democrat, I think, ever in the 20th century.
You think? Oh.
His policies were to the right of Richard Nixon's domestically. Clinton, a very capable person also, well, look what happened. They set up an investigation while he was president, and they tried to destroy him, and he was impeached. And he got through it by the skin of his teeth. Now, with Obama, it's even worse, because he's black. And we would like this terrible curse to be finished in the United States, but it's not. Racism. And the racism continues, but we've evolved to such a point that no one can say this out loud. Therefore, the simmering racism against Obama is never articulated. But when you look at the hostility of the Republicans towards his administration and towards everything he's proposed, it has been a blockade against every bill he's set forth before Congress. Mitch McConnell, who was just reelected yesterday as senator of Kentucky, who will now be the majority leader of the Senate, said about 4 years ago, our job as Republicans is to do one thing, is to stop and destroy Obama. Now, I've never heard any president
He actually said
he
that?
said that in public. And this is what they've tried to do. So even the healthcare law that was passed, the one thing that Obama managed to get done in the early days of his first term, the vote in Congress was Democrats voted for it and 0 Republicans. 0. And since the bill was passed and made into law, 50 times, the House of Representatives has voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act. An absolutely insane gesture, playing to the right-wing constituents of these people. We're in a meltdown in America right now, and I'm not the only one to say this.
Not because you're a Democrat.
No, it's nothing to do with this. It's an objective truth that we're more divided now than we've ever been since the Civil War.
Really?
In 1861, yeah.
Divided? That's a deep division in American society, you mean?
Two sides in America cannot talk to each other anymore. They talk past each other. There's no common ground. And even in the past, Republicans and Democrats always more or less agreed on foreign policy. Well, now the Republicans are attacking everything Obama does abroad as well. And we're in this sort of chaotic box of noise, and no one's doing anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's get a little bit more literary now. The other book that came out here in Greece very recently was your novel Sunset Park.
Mm-hmm.
And on the foreground, it seems that there is a economic collapse in the U.S. during 2008. But I feel that Sunset Park combines the social, the collective and the personal, the existential and the political, the philosophy and history. Is this, in this respect, a typical Paul Auster novel? This combination of...
No, I think it's different. I hope my work keeps evolving. I don't know what's a typical novel by me.
The way you combine, you may be political, and at the same time, you may see some dimensions that are more, let's say, existential or philosophical issues that have to do with human existence and human life and relationships as well.
Sunset Park was the first book I consciously set out to write about now, with a capital N. So I was writing it in 2009, and I was writing about things that had happened only 6 months earlier. I mean, most novels are written about a past, 5 years before, 10 years before, 50 years before. But I was trying, and nearly the entire book is written in the present tense. And it's the first book I've written with multiple points of view. The previous book, Invisible, to some degree.
Yeah, it has.
But there were only three elements. This one has more. And it was a very kind of thrilling experience to be doing this, I have to say. But what somebody's phone is ringing.
Yes,
yeah.
I know.
Okay.
It's a curse.
Yeah, that's why I don't carry them. Yeah. Anyway, when I think about that book, the first thing that comes to mind is it's a book about houses and homes. Mm-hmm. We have this distinction in English. A house is a physical structure. We have more music.
Well,
Actually,
we need to
people turn off cell phones.
turn off the
okay?
cell phones,
Yes.
yes. Παρακαλώ πολύ, κλείστε τα κινητά σας.
A house is a building. A home is essentially a family in a house, or not even in a house. So we have Miles Heller cleaning out abandoned houses. People have been kicked out. They couldn't afford the mortgages anymore. There were millions of people in America who lost their houses and very nearly their homes as well. And then Miles's family is in a kind of crisis and has been for some time. So as you say, it's about the big story of the country, but it's the little story of individual people as well, and all of it intermingling in one big book.
You mentioned that people, houses and homes, and that the lack of it, the absence of that. I had the feeling that do you examine in this novel that what one can endure, and also how can one, with his or her knees, stand on his or her own feet again? Is this a theme that comes in variations, in different variations? I think also that in some of your books, you have an image of a person literally falling. The idea of falling is... It's well, in Leviathan, particularly. Yeah, that's the book in which somebody falls, nearly gets killed, but doesn't. Yeah. And I understand that, again, from your own life, you once saw your own father falling.
No, I didn't see him. That was the thing. My father was fixing the roof of a building, and he fell off. It was probably 4 or 5 stories. He should have been killed, but as he was falling, he hit a laundry line, that was laundry drying on the line, and it broke the impact of the fall, and he landed on the ground, and he was fine. He got up, and no broken bones, nothing.
But this incident acquired some more drama in your inner self, I think.
Well, I wrote about it in one of the stories in the Red Notebook, because the same year that happened to my father, the neighbors across the street were having their house painted, and one of the house painters fell off the ladder and died. And it's all very strange.
But metaphorically speaking, a person falling is something that can ignite a novelist's imagination.
Yes, well, this idea of because I didn't see it, I always had this idea of my father falling through the air in my head as a little kid. And you see, this is in some way how my mind works. So that was Leviathan,
yes,
which came out in, I don't know, in 1992, I think. The next book I wrote was Mr. Vertigo. I wanted to get somebody off the ground. I've been thinking about falling so much. Then this idea about this boy who could get off and levitate came in. So there's a kind of dialectic bouncing around in there. And I think when I write a book, I'm always trying to undo the thing I did before, and always trying to start from scratch, really reinvent it. And if certain things seem to bear my mark, it's because I can't ever escape myself completely. But I'm always trying new approaches to telling stories.
And as you said before, you have multiple narrative points in Sunset Park, but you also have that in Invisible.
Yes.
But it seems that the narrator or the narrators can be unreliable.
That's true too. Yes.
That's true too.
Particularly in Invisible.
Invisible, yes. That's the case, especially there. The Russians have an interesting proverb that this person is lying as an eyewitness.
Lying as an eyewitness.
Lying as an eyewitness, because even in non-fiction you can be very unreliable when you narrate a thing that happened to you. Because you start making things up once you narrate, don't you?
No. I have to make a very strict division between the two kinds of books I've written. Now, I've written a lot of novels, I think 16, and I've written 5 autobiographical works of different sorts. And the effort in writing an autobiographical work for me is to tell the truth as far as I can remember it. Not to invent, not to make up. And that's the pact you make with the reader. If the reader suspects that you're making it up and lying, then you lose all credibility and the book becomes without any value at all. Then you should just call it a novel. Right?
You do not fabricate, but at the same time you not invent, but it's suddenly kind of becoming fiction, even the non-fiction.
No. It's quite true that our memories are unreliable often, and even when I'm straining to tell the truth or to remember things as they happened, I could be making mistakes, but they're not intentional mistakes. So the effort to tell the truth is always there. And then the opposite happens with a novel. This is what's so interesting, because people have constantly said, oh, your novels are so autobiographical, and they're all coming out of your life. Well, they're not. And nearly, just about nothing in my novels is autobiographical. These are made-up stories. But, like all novelists, I do sometimes steal things from the real world. But it could be an insignificant thing, like the shape of a woman's nose, or the color of a table, or some little thing that happened to me, some little meal I had, and I want to put that food in the book. But it doesn't matter, because you see, once you enter the zone of the book, of a novel, whether the thing is real or not, it becomes imaginary. And my wife, Siri Hustvedt, the most brilliant person I know, has articulated this. She's come up with a new phrase, and I think it's absolutely extraordinarily accurate and useful. The aesthetic frame, she calls it. And so it's when it's just this thing. You take something and then you put it in the frame, and then it becomes a work. It's part of a work of art. And you deal with the work of art in a different way from the way you deal with the real world, or even a non-fiction book. And I think it's important to make these distinctions.
So the Winter Journal that came out today is a autobiographical book, but it's not strictly speaking, an autobiography.
No, what I think of this book is as a literary work composed of autobiographical fragments. It's not a narrative book. I was thinking of music as I was writing it. I thought of the book as a musical composition, a kind of a fugue, so that some little thing can be mentioned in the beginning, in passing, and then dropped. And then 50 pages later, I pick it up again and then expand it. It's like, a little horn in an orchestra, and then boom, 50 pages later, there's 7 horns playing, and then the strings come back, and the drums, and so it has this musical quality to it. But it's not an autobiography per se, nor is it a memoir. It's
it plays with time, doesn't it?
well, you know, in one block I'm 5 years old, the next block I'm 50 years old. So it's swirling around time. It's an associative book rather than a linear book. But you see, the thing is, it's written in the second person, and that's fundamental to the whole enterprise. And so is the next one, Report from the Interior. They're both written in the second person. Why? I've never read an autobiographical work in the second person, ever. Some novels, yes, but not nonfiction. Well, I wanted to, I think, create a distance between myself and myself. And if I address myself as you, I could see myself and then be in this intimate dialogue with this person who's me, but also somewhat estranged from me, because that person is in the past. At the same time, the you, I think, will affect the reader in a strange way, and make the reader feel implicated in the book. And I think what I was really trying to do is just talk about things that are common to us all. I mean, we all have bodies, we've all had these experiences, we've all suffered pains, we've all experienced pleasures, and I was hoping that this book would be a kind of trigger for the reader for his or her own memories. You know, the similar things that had happened to them, and therefore a way to relive your life in the same way I was reliving my life in the pages of this book.
I see. Yeah. Now, in this book, you write that when you published The Invention of Solitude, which was also an autobiographical book, members of the Oster family were distressed, weren't
Yes,
they?
they were.
Did it have to do with the fact that you mentioned that your grandmother killed your grandfather way back in 1919?
Yes.
What a scandal.
It was a scandal, and it was the big family secret. Nobody talked about it.
Why did she kill him?
Well,
that's the secret you don't want to share.
If I had been there, I would tell you.
Okay.
I mean, my grandmother was, I knew her. She died when I was 10. I was frightened to death of her. She was about this tall, and she could barely speak English. And
she was speaking Yiddish?
Yiddish, and she was a ferocious person. My grandfather left her. He was with another woman. This is taking place in the Midwest, you know, in the early 20th century. They were living in Kenosha, Wisconsin, very near Chicago. He was in Chicago with somebody else. He came back to the house. There were 4 boys and 1 girl. My father was the youngest. He was 7. He came with presents for all the kids, clothing and things, and he was changing a light bulb in the kitchen, and she came downstairs with a gun and shot him. That was it. No, she never told anyone she was going to do it. She just did it.
Was he imprisoned or something?
No, this is the thing. It was
good for her.
She had a brilliant lawyer. I read all the transcripts, and the lawyer, he got her off on two counts. 1, temporary insanity, and justifiable homicide.
Okay.
Because her husband was unfaithful to her.
All right.
And you should read the newspapers from the time. It sounds like a Victorian novel. It's also sentimental, and the language is so inflated. It was another era. So she got away with it. And my grandfather was only 36 years old when this happened.
Aye.
So
your father was affected by this incident?
What do you think? Huh? I mean, it wrecked the family. It was a destroyed family. But the 4 boys, none of them ever talked to their children about it. I had 9 first cousins. None of us knew anything about what had happened. But I knew that there had to be something strange when, over the course of the years when I was a child, I'd ask my father, how did his father die? The first story, he died as a soldier in World War I. Then a year later, he died in a hunting accident. Or he died falling off a roof, strangely enough. Yeah. Well, I know you can't die 3 times. Even as a child, I knew that. So this is how we found out. And I talk about it in The Invention of Solitude. A cousin of mine, one of the first cousins, the daughter of the next oldest brother, in 1970, so it's 51 years after this thing happened, was going to Europe on a vacation. And she got on the plane, and she found herself sitting next to an old man, and they began talking. And it turned out the old man was from Kenosha, Wisconsin. And she said, oh, well, my father grew up in Kenosha, Wisconsin. He said, so what's your name? And she said, Oster. And he said, your grandmother wasn't a crazy little woman with red hair, was she? Yes, that was my grandmother. And he told her the story. And when he went back to Kenosha, he went to the newspaper and photocopied all the articles about the case and sent them to her, and then she eventually sent them to me. And that's how I learned all this. Wow. I never told my father that I knew, because he lived another 7 years or so. But I could never bring myself to tell him.
You respected that?
No, and none of the cousins, we all knew, all the next generation knew by then, but none of us told our fathers that we knew.
Now,
so how do you like that for a strange family?
Yeah, well, it's a bit strange, okay, yeah. The family
So when I published this book, you can understand, my father was dead, but this uncle, the father of the cousin, he went crazy. He wanted to kill me, and he thought I had exposed family secrets. Whereas when the book came out, nobody really focused on that. This is not what the book is about. It's a small part of the book, and whatever people found interesting about it had nothing to do with that story. Yeah.
But you, in the Winter Journal, you have a really wonderful short passage about your father, especially at the end.
Yeah.
Do you have your glasses? You can read a short...
Do you have it in English?
Yeah, of course.
My Greek isn't too good.
Yeah, I know. Mine isn't. Can you just read this?
Oh, yeah, this is right from, very close to the end of the book.
Yeah. It's brilliant.
Talking to your father in your dreams. For many years now, he has been visiting you in a dark room on the other side of consciousness, sitting down at a table with you for long, unhurried conversations, calm and circumspect, always treating you with kindness and goodwill, always listening carefully to what you say to him. But once the dream is over and you wake up, you can't recall a single word either one of you said.
It's just great stuff.
Well, that's the truth, you know. I can't remember these dreams. I know I have them, but I can't grab onto anything that happened inside them.
You were close with your dad?
No, not terribly close, no.
What about your mom? You were close?
Close to her, yes. To her. Yeah.
You mentioned in one of your interviews now that by the age of 50, most of us are haunted by ghosts. You remember that line?
Yeah.
Because most of the people that you care for and you love for start dying. Is this sense of loss? I feel that the idea of loss is very central in your work as well.
It is. I think it's something that keeps coming up, because I think it's the toughest thing we have to deal with as human beings in our lives, is losing people we care about. How many people do you love in the course of a lifetime? 6, 8, 10? Not more than that, really. And then when you start losing them, you really are bereft. And how you deal with it is, it's crucial. It's crucial. And especially when people die young, then it's almost unbearable to have to deal with this. So I think I'm always interested in writing about the tough things we have to do. And I think dealing with death is one of the toughest things.
Reality bites.
Yeah.
Well, let's see a third short video again that has to do a lot with the strangeness of reality.
Oh, well, I can't wait.
You're traveling to another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Were you watching it back then?
Does anyone know what this television show is?
Yeah. It was shown here as well.
They show it in Greek TV. Well, it started in 1959. I was 12.
So.
And I loved it. It was on every Friday night, and all my friends loved it too. It was these, not really science fiction stories.
The stories of the paradox.
Yeah, paradoxes, fantasy stories, but philosophical puzzles, I suppose. And the creator of the show is a man named Rod Serling. And I always thought that he had something similar in his sensibility to O. Henry, who was a well-known American short story writer who was famous for his surprise endings. You know? And the most famous O. Henry story being The Gift of the Magi, which, when I was 11 years old, I thought was a masterpiece. It's very simply the story of a husband and wife. They're very young and they're very poor. And the thing that the man loves most is his watch. And the thing that woman is most happy about is her beautiful long hair. And so Christmas is coming. They don't have any money. And she goes and has her hair cut off to get money to buy him a chain for his watch. And he goes out and sells his watch to buy her combs for her hair.
Well, this show had a lot to do with the strangeness of reality, and of course, in a very different way. Your own work has a lot to do with that. And you have said that reality is more terrible than anything we can imagine. And also, I suppose I'm after to write fiction as strange as the world we live in.
Yes, that's exactly
It's exactly the point. And in your novel Man in the Dark, August Brill says at one point, the real and the imagined are one. Thoughts are real, even thoughts of unreal things. That's very striking.
Yes.
Thoughts of unreal things can be real.
Yes, well, this is in effect art. It's fiction. And fiction is real because it's an experience we live through when we read a book. It's a real experience, even though we're dwelling in an imaginary world. And that imaginary world will affect us in the real world. I mean, we all think about the books we care about most. We carry them around inside us. You know, for years we think about certain characters, and those imaginary people become just as vivid as real people. You know, Hamlet is somebody we think about. Don Quixote, we think about him as if he were someone we knew.
Or Joseph K.
Or yeah, Joseph K.
Kafka's
any number of imaginary characters are part of our real world now. Sherlock Holmes. Think about Sherlock Holmes. People used to write letters to Sherlock Holmes in London, thinking that he was a real person. You know?
Okay. We kind of talked about a little bit about loss and death. Let's a little bit now turn to love and sex and women. We talked a little bit about that yesterday in the car, how women affect our lives. And of course...
That was boy talk. I don't know if we want to...
Okay. But you write in Winter Journal that you were a willing slave of Eros. That's very interesting. You're using the Greek word for love, for Eros.
Yeah. Well, aren't we all? I think it seems to be the most passionate thing we do in life is get involved in erotic stories with other people. This is the most thrilling thing that happens to us.
You talk a lot about your wife, Siri. You're very affectionately and with a great admiration. You're both writers, and she's also very of a high esteem worldwide. How is it to live together, two writers of such fame, coexisting?
The funny thing is, everyone thinks this is going to be a problem, or it should be a problem, but it never has been, and we've been together now for 30, how many years? Almost 35 years. It's 34 years. It's never been a problem. In fact, having someone who does what you do is a great help, because I can talk to her about my work, she can talk to me about her work, we can read to each other, we can show our manuscripts to each other, and we are always the first reader, first critic of the other's work. And she's got a great literary intelligence, and I trust her comments very much. When she says something's not working, I really go back and fix it, because she's always right. And she listens to me as well. Every writer needs a critic, a reader. But it has to be a sympathetic reader, someone who believes in your project, and we each believe in what the other's doing. But in order to help, you have to be completely honest. You can't look at something and think it's not perfect or not as good as it can be and pat the other person on the back and say, good job. You're not helping that way. So we're pretty ruthless about it, brutal and direct, but all to the cause of trying to help the other make the best work possible. It's just not a problem. I'm older than she is, too, by 8 years. So I was already publishing, and when I met her, and she was still a graduate student doing her PhD and writing poems. That's what she was doing then.
Well, poems. You wrote poetry, and you translated a lot of poetry. I mean, it's very unique for an American writer to have been through that, translating especially French poetry and surrealism and stuff like that. That shaped you in the beginning of your career.
Yeah, it was a very passionate activity, I have to say. But it's not unusual. Now, there's another book I did, which no one in Greece could possibly know about, because it was an anthology of 20th century French poetry that I edited. And it came out, 1982, so a long time ago. So I worked on it from around 79 to 81. And there are 50 poets, 50 French poets in it. And it's remarkable, the American and British poets who are in there as translators. I'll give you a few names, just so you know that what I did was not so unusual. Samuel Beckett is the first translator in the book. T.S. Eliot is a translator. Wallace Stevens is a translator. William Carlos Williams is a translator. John Ashbery is a translator. With W.S. Merwin's a translator. Kenneth Rex Ross is a translator. Just about every American poet tried his hand at. Paul Bowles is a translator at doing French poetry.
With the exception of Paul Bowles and I think Samuel Beckett, most of the other people you mentioned are poets, not novelists.
That's true.
It's rare for an American novelist.
But when I was translating poetry,
you were a poet.
I wasn't writing novels then. I was just doing poetry.
But, okay then, you're a strikingly American writer. You have been associated with New York due to the New York trilogy mainly, but most of your books are set all over America. So you're very American, not just because of the scenery. But I think European culture and European literature has shaped you a lot. How much do you think there's a balance inside you? How much European or...
I think, again, you'd have to be deaf and dumb and blind to read only literature in your own language. I don't think there's a single writer on this planet who's only stuck in his own language or culture. There's really a funny thing. I saw on the news in America about 30 years ago. It was a story about a school district in the South that had run out of money, or they're running out of money, and they decided that they had to make cuts. So the first thing they did was eliminate the teaching of foreign languages. And this was very strange back then, and the TV news team went out there to talk to the people of the town. And one man actually said this, because they asked, do you have any problem with this? He said, no, I don't have any problem with it. If English was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me, right? So even that man with his Holy Bible, both Old and New Testaments, he's reading in translation. Yes. You know, every American crackpot is reading in translation. Yes. We're all reading in translation. There's no literature without, listen, Flaubert influences Joyce. You know, Joyce influences Faulkner. Faulkner influences Garcia Marquez. This is the way literature goes. It's transnational. It transcends any particular language. So, yeah, I've been reading things from all over the world all my life. But early on, I would say in these high school years, and there are these terrific high school kids up there, we were talking earlier, at that point in my life, I was reading American literature very seriously. I'm talking about, 15, 16, 17 years old, particularly 20th century, meaning Hemingway, Faulkner, Fitzgerald, Dos Passos, Steinbeck, Nathaniel West, all the names that are still part of what people think of as American literature in the first half of the century. But it was also the time when I discovered the Russian novelists, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Turgenev, Gogol, and the French, particularly Camus and Gide, and then some Sartre also. These were great revelations, and then Germans, and even Greek poets, and all kinds of things. And I think I can't think of a single American novelist I know who hasn't read all of these things as well. No.
Talking about American novelists, right now, in the last few decades, I think fiction in America is of the highest level. I mean, it's you, there's Don DeLillo, there's Philip Roth, and people. The Nobel Academy in Sweden somehow is not hostile, but I don't know, it's snobbish towards the Americans. Why is that so? Do you feel the same thing?
You're asking the wrong person. I don't know why. I have no idea. I mean, it's not something I'm thinking about either. I don't know.
It's strange. Some people think that they're very much against Philip Roth, but it's not just Roth that enrages them. It's the whole thing. And I keep forgetting other names like Dr. O and other important writers. But it's amazing.
I'm sure an American will win again, and maybe more than one. Who knows?
When you get it, just remember this discussion.
They gave out the prize. Well, I know Siri looked online. Every year in England, they have these the odds about the Nobel Prize. So I don't know. 7 years ago, I was 100 to 1. I remember, and this year she looked it up, 30 to 1. So I'm moving up. It's of no consequence.
I really like your sense of humor, and I think this sense of humor goes way into the books as well. One of my favorite.
I hope so.
Yeah, they do. And one of my favorite books of yours is Brooklyn Follies. But the first phrase, which is remarkable, the first sentence is, "I was looking for a quiet place to die."
I think that's one of the funniest lines I've ever written.
Someone recommended Brooklyn.
Yes.
But that book is also associated with an American tragedy because it was the 9/11 the background.
Well, it's not the background so much as the thing that happens right outside of the frame of the book. The book ends at 8 o'clock in the morning on September 11th. Yeah. The planes hit the buildings at 8:46. And I think I was very influenced by something Billy Wilder had said, which was this. He said, when you're feeling really good about yourself and life is going well, that's the moment to do a tragedy. But when you're feeling very down and dark and blue, that's when you should do a comedy. And I felt so down and blue after 9/11. I thought I have to lift up. I have to take another perspective. And I thought about just writing a book about ordinary life and how lucky we are to have ordinary lives with all our ordinary problems. Because it's a comedy. It's the only book I consciously set out to write as a comedy. And by comedy, I mean a book in which, or a story in which people are somewhat better off at the end than they were at the beginning. That's all a comedy is. A tragedy is when everyone's worse off.
Okay.
So Shakespeare, the tragedies end with dead bodies on the stage. The comedies end with everyone getting married, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty much. So this was a comedy.
But in Brooklyn Follows, there's this irony, because it ends 45 minutes before tragedy strikes.
I know. Well, but he's alive. You see, Nathan has gone through this attack. He thinks he's had a heart attack, and he doesn't know even if he's going to get through the night. Turns out it wasn't a heart attack, and they let him out of the hospital. And I must say, that morning of September 11th, 2001 was one of the most beautiful September mornings I can ever remember in New York. And he's looking up at the blue sky, and he's just so happy to be alive. And
let's take a breath. I would like to, the video number 5, not 4, number 5, we'll skip one.
Kiss me goodbye and write me while I'm gone. Goodbye, my sweetheart. Hello, Vietnam. America has heard the bugle call.
You remember that thing?
And you know it involves us one and all. I don't suppose that war will ever end. There's fighting that will break us up again. Goodbye, my darling, hello, Vietnam. I'm here to take a battle to be won. Kiss me goodbye and write me while I'm gone. Goodbye, my sweetheart, hello, Vietnam.
You skipped that. Thank God.
yeah, that's not a very good movie, though.
It's not?
No, it's strange. He filmed a Vietnam movie in England. It doesn't make any sense. There's something off about that film. But no, I didn't go. I didn't have to.
But you were
Luckily.
jailed for a night because
One
of
night.
protests.
Well, that was 68 at Columbia University. We had our own little revolution there, and 700 of us got arrested. So I was one of many. But the Vietnam War, I was against it, ferociously against it. I was not going to go. And if I had been drafted into the army, I would have gone to prison.
You told me that yesterday. You wouldn't fly to Canada.
No, I wasn't going to run away. I was going to just stand up and go to jail for a couple of years. It was a very strong point. I got lucky. Back then there was a draft, and every person between 18 and 35 was eligible for the draft, every male. There were no women in the Army then. If you were in a university, you could get a student deferment, but not for graduate school, only undergraduate. So I graduated in 1969, June, and I got my draft notice, I don't know, 2 weeks later. By August, I was having my physical, and but I never got called. And then by the fall of that year, they changed the system, and they instituted what they called the draft lottery. And so every birth date got a number, 1 through 366. And so the lower the number, the greater the chance of being called up. I got number 297. And it was as if 4 years of a ton of cement on my back had been lifted, because I knew I wouldn't have to go. And I wouldn't have to go to jail. I wouldn't have to fight this fight that would have probably made my life a completely different life from what it was and what it is. So it was lucky. Again, the music of chance. Not number 1, number 297. So I didn't have to have my head shaved like that. Yeah.
Thank God for that.
Yeah.
But America seemed pretty lost back then. Do you feel that you said in the beginning that America is kind of lost even today?
We're very lost today.
Is it the world that is lost also as well?
The world's in a very confusing spot right now, and I've been traveling a lot in the last few weeks, and I've been in 4 different countries in Europe. I started in Poland, and I was in Switzerland, France, and now here. Everyone seems miserable everywhere. Everyone's complaining about everything. And in America, everyone's complaining as well. Something isn't functioning. You know, the system that we built up is defective, and it needs to be fixed. And the problem is, no one has an idea how to do this. And I think it's not that I regret the Cold War. It's not that. But when there were still people who believed in Marxism in the world, and when there was still some ideological argument against capitalism, I think this gave people hope. People believed in, the coming socialist revolution, not the Stalinist revolution, not the Soviet Union, but some way of overcoming the hardships of capitalism, the brutality of capitalism. They had some kind of hope, almost a religious belief in the future. But nobody believes this anymore. It's gone. So we have nothing opposing capitalist ideology. The only thing is nuances. Well, we have, pure capitalism, more protected capitalism, softer and harder. But everyone seems to be a capitalist now. And capitalism is running amok. The rich are getting richer, everyone else is getting poorer. And you see all around the world these spontaneous movements of young people, whether it's Occupy Wall Street in New York.
You're in favor of this movement?
Yeah, I am. And or whether it's in Russia, 5 years ago there was huge demonstrations. Even in Israel they had demonstrations that had nothing to do with the Middle East crisis, just internal Israeli life.
And in Turkey too.
And in Spain too, and in Turkey too, and
here as well.
Not to speak of Egypt and the so-called Arab Spring, which is all young people starting it. And what they were saying is, we've got educations, we're qualified, and there's no work. There's no future for any of us. Fix it. Well, no one knows how to fix it. And the people with these impulses who've started these movements have no political experience. And so in every case they've been pushed away immediately, and into the vacuum comes, I don't know, the Muslim Brotherhood or some new military dictatorship. And I don't know. We need a new Karl Marx. We need a new way to think about the world, and no one has figured it out yet.
My God, you just gave the title of tomorrow's reportage tonight. We need a new Karl Marx.
Yes.
So what is the role of a novelist? You think a novelist has a special role in a situation like this? Or he or she has a role that...
I don't know. There are different kinds of novelists. I wouldn't even want to say there's one thing novelists do. Some novelists really just simply entertain us, and that's a wonderful thing. Life is hard, and if people can be entertained and distracted from their problems for a while, I'm all for it. And then there are novelists who are, wrestling with the big questions about life and death and society. I think this can be very exciting to read and challenging, and make you think about the world differently. And I think, for me, art has always been a way to question things as they are. Tarkovsky, the very good Russian filmmaker, said a beautiful thing that I think about a lot. He said, people make art because the world isn't perfect.
Isn't perfect.
Is not perfect. That's a beautiful statement, and it's true.
I'm pretty sure you're aware that in the audience today there may be many aspiring writers. What would you give them an advice? And after that, we can turn to a Q&A.
Okay. Well, as I said to a very young girl earlier up in the balcony, she asked that same question, and this is how I answered it. I said, whenever young writers ask me about being a writer, I say, don't do it. Just don't do it. Because what you're asking yourself for is a life of solitude, so you really have to have a taste for being alone. A life probably of no money, and maybe even a life with no readers. And if you want to devote yourself to that, fine, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Don't expect anything.
I wouldn't recommend it. All right, so here's the twist. If someone accepts what I say, well, they shouldn't be a writer in the first place. And a person who wants to be a writer would say, I don't agree with you. I'm going to do it anyway. And I said, fine, go ahead and do it. But I have no advice to give you, because everybody finds it for himself or herself. There's no rule. It's just you have to figure it out on your own.
Okay, now we'll turn to the Q&A part. Ερωτήσεις από το κοινό, όπως είπα και πριν, θα θέλαμε να έχουμε
Questions from the
ερωτήσεις και όχι
audience.
σχόλια.
As I said earlier,
Και όσο το δυνατόν να
we
είμαστε πιο
want
λακωνικοί και
questions,
σύντομοι.
not comments. And please be brief
Περιμένω
and to the
χέρια, λοιπόν.
point. Therefore, please, show of hands.
Just... Είναι ο κύριος με το γαλάζιο πουκάμισο εδώ.
So, the gentleman in the blue shirt.
Στην τρίτη σειρά εδώ. Ο κύριος, δώστε το χέρι σας αν θέλετε.
Please put up your hand.
Θα ρωτήσετε στα αγγλικά ή στα ελληνικά?
Are you going to speak in English?
I'm going to ask in English.
Okay.
This person here with the gentleman here with the...
Over here. Thank you. You mentioned about reading, translated versions, that all authors read. As a novelist yourself, do you read for pleasure or for guidance or inspiration?
I think I have to talk about my reading habits historically, because my reading has evolved over the years. When I was very young, I read for pure pleasure. Then when I got older, teenager, thinking about becoming a writer myself, I read with a kind of avidity to learn everything about literature, but also for the pleasure of it, because one loves reading books. And then these days, I'm writing fiction so often, I can't read novels while I'm writing. So I can only read novels in between books. And while I write, I'm reading history, biography, and so on. And when I was 20, I would read a book a day. But this isn't the case anymore. I'm not eating books up the way I used to. And I think it's something that I learned when I was young. Whenever I would talk to older writers about the writers that really excited me, they always seemed indifferent. And I never understood why. And I'm talking about great writers. And it's because after a certain point, you're not going to change anymore. You're on your own road. And no writer that I read now is going to change the way I write. And so the passion for discovering new people has diminished, I have to say. But it's a function of getting older. So I feel a little embarrassed to admit this. But, and I do try to read, new people. But it's not the same excitement that I had when I was young.
Anyone? Είδα τον κύριο. Θα ρωτήσετε στα αγγλικά ή στα ελληνικά? Στα αγγλικά. In English again.
The introduction usually goes one of the greatest living writers. So how do you feel when you listen to that? How does Paul Auster, the person, feel about Paul Auster, the writer?
I don't believe it. I just don't listen to it. All these things just fly right past me. Because, I live my life the way I've always lived my life, inside. It's in here. And the things from the outside, they really don't get in. It's not part of me.
Κάποια κυρία έχει σηκώσει το χέρι της πριν από τον... Εδώ η κυρία εδώ.
Hello. I would like to ask you if, for some reason, you had to choose among novels of others, not yours, because for some reason you need to, because your home is destroyed or you have to leave for a trip forever and you need to take them with you. Which ones would you take with you, 5 or 6? Thank you.
5 or 6? Just novels. We're not talking about
yes,
poetry.
Yes, just novels.
All right. If I had to take 5 or 6, it's a horrible question. I don't know. I would take Don Quixote because I've read it about 5 times. I keep rereading it because it's always new for me. I might take a Dickens because I love Dickens. Probably Our Mutual Friend. I think that's my favorite Dickens novel. And then I would have to take a Tolstoy. Probably War and Peace. Because if I only have 5 books, they should be long ones, right? Right? and then, what else would I want to take? I'm trying to think.
An American novel, perhaps?
American novel. Oh yeah, I would take Moby Dick.
Moby Dick.
Yeah. Which is one of the strangest books ever written. I've thought about Moby Dick so much.
It's not a great American novel, though.
No, it's a book with no precedent and no successor. It's a book that is only itself. But it is so wonderful on every level. So I would take Moby Dick. And what else? What would be the 5th? Maybe I would take maybe The Castle by Kafka.
Yeah. Good laughs. Yeah. Η κυρία. Περιμένετε για το μικρόφωνο.
Ευχαριστώ. Hi, I've read most of your stuff and I've been wondering at times, is New York a source of inspiration for you? Or in particular Manhattan and his mystery and all the strange people going around? I wonder if you had stayed in Paris, would your themes be kind of different?
I didn't hear you too well. You're saying, is New York an inspiration to me?
Yeah.
And the strange people in New York?
If you would be in Paris, you would write differently?
If I had stayed in Paris, would I have written differently? Well, I don't know, because I didn't stay in Paris. It's impossible to know. I think, of course, where you live affects what you write. There's no question about it. I live in New York. I've lived most of my life there, so it's been a big factor in my books, but as was pointed out, not all of my books are set in New York either. It's not the only place that interests me. But New York is the place where I want to be. I certainly find it the most interesting place over the long term. It's not necessarily the nicest place or the best place, but it's the most interesting. It can be very hard living there and tiring. But I live in Brooklyn, you know, it's a bit quieter there than Manhattan.
Brooklyn is really nice.
Yeah. There's somebody.
Είναι κάποιοι... κύριε πάνω, ωραία.
Hello, I'm hurt, right. I couldn't help Mr. Oster but notice that on several occasions you mentioned narrative point of view, person, etc., etc. This indicated to me that there is a kind of ongoing dialectic in your work between you, as you, the creator, the persona / narrator, and the reader. And I quote you, what you said before, in other words, when you said that in your recent winter journal, you adopted an unusual you because you wanted to attain a distance between myself and myself as you. So that means that at this stage, or I may be mistaken about that, somehow the reader and your connection to the reader comes to the forefront suddenly in Winter Journal. Is that true? Is this why you used the unusual you, second person, as your narrator, which is not a narrator?
No, it wasn't that I was thinking about the reader in that way, in any direct way. I'm not really addressing the reader, but I'm addressing myself and thinking about it. But then I realized that a kind of byproduct of this process would include the reader, and how interesting that was. And maybe that was something that was important as well. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a critic. I'm just writing the books. And I don't really understand what I'm doing most of the time. It's all about instinct, what sounds right, what feels right. I don't know if any novelist or poet could ever really defend the work he or she does. Just say, it's just what feels right. I know that when you're writing, it's easy to know when you've made a mistake. You know, because that's really a terrible sentence. That's an awful word. I shouldn't have used that. And that's a stupid thought. And I should cross that out. But when it's good, then it becomes a little more ambiguous. You think it's good, but maybe someone else doesn't.
It does have a contradiction, though, because on one hand, you distance yourself from the reader, on the other, you bring the reader to a point where the reader can relate with you.
Well, you see, I'm really not interested in myself very much. And I've written 5 autobiographical books. So what does this mean? It's just that I'm using myself as an example of a human being, that's all. I thought to use the first person in this book, the I, would have been too exclusionary, because I have nothing that interesting to talk about. And I don't want to make a big deal about my own story. So I needed to distance it a little so that it flows into the stories of everybody else at the same time.
Okay, I have a question here from a girl from school who asks, if you had an idea at midnight, would you get up from your bed and write?
The kids are the smartest, aren't they? They're the best, yeah. That's a great question.
Hats off to the kids, yeah.
Well, I've often had ideas at midnight. Sometimes I'm in bed and I'm too tired to get out. And I think, oh, what a terrific idea. I have to try to wake up and write it down. But then I fall asleep. And in the morning, I forget. I can't remember what it was. And I feel maybe I've lost 3 or 4 really good books that way.
Really?
Yeah.
What a confession.
Yeah. And then sometimes I do get up and then I write it down and I go to sleep and I look at it in the morning and it's just absolutely stupid.
The lady here.
Hello, this is a kind of a political question. You mentioned before that there's going to be, or it should be, a new Karl Marx. Do you think that this Karl Marx would come from a lower class, person from a lower class, or from an upper class, or a scholar, or which country? Probably United States or another country, Europe. Can you see any Karl Marx as a writer right now?
No, I don't know where this person would come from. I don't know at all. We haven't seen him yet, and maybe it won't even be a he. Maybe it'll be a she. And just a new way of looking at how we live and interpreting this enormously complex system we've set up. I mean, we're so much more connected to one another than we've ever been in the past. The so-called global economy and all this social media and so on. But I don't think it's made us any happier. It's just made things go faster. And I think deep down, we're all looking for something more than what money is going to give us. And somehow we've gotten into a world in which money always has the last word now. And it can be a little depressing. So I'm hoping, we'll see.
It's this gentleman there, and then the lady here, the second row.
Welcome, and thank you for being with us tonight.
Where is he?
Hello. Right here, yeah. You've done a brilliant translation of Mallarmé into English. And this evening, you talked about the Twilight Zone. Is there any connection between these two things in your work?
Mallarmé and the Twilight Zone. Probably not.
No.
No, I don't think so. But I don't know if everything has to be connected.
No.
There are a lot of things that should be separate, I think. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
The lady here in the second row.
Hi, nice meeting you. I'm very happy with that. Does this procedure, writing, ever stops? Have you ever considered quitting, stopping to write? Many writers have already announced that they're not going to write anymore.
Yeah, I think about it all the time. But I haven't come to the point where I want to do that. I want to keep going. But maybe if I live long enough, a moment might come when I feel that what I'm doing is not new anymore. And if I feel I'm just treading water, then I don't want to do it. But right now, I'm involved in writing the longest book of my life, and it's going to take me a few more years to finish. So I'm not thinking about stopping anytime soon.
The lady there with the black shirt. And we have something like 4 minutes or something, and then...
Hi. I'd like to ask you how you get your ideas about your books. You said earlier that you consciously wanted to write something happy after the 9/11, or how you wanted to write something about now. What about the rest of your books? Do you find your hero first, or do you get the storyline first? How does that happen?
It's never conscious, and I made it too simple with those two examples, because The Brooklyn Follies was a book that had been kicking around in my head for years, and then it finally coalesced into what it became. No, I don't know where the ideas come from. I don't know where it is. It's some kind of buzzing in my head. It's usually kind of music. Before there are any words, there's a rhythm. and I can hear the tone of the book before I even know what the book is. Or
What's the ignition?
a character will come. Somebody will just float through my consciousness. And then another element forms, and then they start to attach themselves to one another. This process can take months or years, literally years. Some books I thought about for 10 years before I could write them. On the other hand, a little book that I wrote about, 7 or 8 years ago, Travels in the Scriptorium. It's a very short book. I had this image in my head. I don't know where it came from. An old man in striped pajamas, sitting on the edge of a bed, with his hands on his knees, wearing slippers, and staring down at the floor. This picture just kept coming back into my head, coming back. What is it? What is it? And then after a few weeks, I thought, well, maybe it's me as an old man. And then an idea started turning. And so I started this story with that image of the man in the pajamas. I don't know why. I can't explain it. 1 minute there's nothing, and then the next minute there's something. And I've never been able to witness what happens in that space. It's like quantum physics.
Yeah, like the Big Bang.
There's no conductor. It's a leap. And suddenly you're in a different place.
There was this lady, that's the final question for tonight. Can you... Raise your hand, please.
Okay, I see her.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Although I'm coming from engineering area, I wanted to ask you something about how do you feel about universities keep cutting down on funding humanities studies, and how this is gonna affect our world?
Well, I'm sure you know what I think. We have to read all these books. If we don't have this common culture, we can't even talk to one another. We'll have nothing to refer to. Again, if it's all numbers and engineering, I pity us. So everyone should agitate for more humanities.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Well, thank you.
I intend to visit you again in Brooklyn, but this time I'll come for Siri.
Yes.
I won't come for you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.